Record. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second Career Lab session of today. This one is watch your mentors interview each other. That's a mouthful. Anyway, today you have Andrew interviewing me in a job fit interview. I always think this is really hard because I could do just a regular interview and probably wing it, but I'm gonna kind of try and wing this one as if I just got out of Collab Lab and don't have like a lot of the experience that I have now to lean on. So that hopefully you can see how some of the questions might be answered from that perspective. Do note though, give me a little grace because it's really hard and I feel like this is true mocking, like on both ends, like both of us mock what we're gonna say. Okay. And then we have Lewis interviewing Jen, who I imagine will be here shortly, and then it's not quite here yet. I'm doing the technical interview that y'all will be doing next week as well. So with that, and also there's like a whole collection of this same session recorded with some different people on our YouTube channel. If you're like, that wasn't enough, I want more, you can go watch more. Anyway, while we're doing this, be thinking through how you would answer these questions based on your experience before Collab Lab or during Collab Lab, because you genuinely have a lot of experiences that you just got in the last 8 weeks that you can lean on in these interviews. So don't discount them. They're very meaningful things. And then when you do get your first job or whatever number job it will be in the tech space, keep really good receipts of the stories that you have. Keep kind of like a story book of interesting things that happen, because then going forward in interviews, you're like, oh, I have a story for that, I have a story for this. And when you're writing them down in the moment, it becomes a lot easier to remember that when you go into the interview process. So any questions before we do the thing? Good. All right. Don't make fun of me. Here we go.
You ready, Stacy?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hi, Stacy. I'm Andrew. I'm an engineering manager at Zapier. And I have a role open on my team, a front-end engineering role. On my team, I can tell you more about the team at some point during the interview, but yeah, we're just going to do what's called a job fit interview today. So I'm just going to, talk to you about your experience and, maybe different things you've kind of come across in your career so far, and just, see how that fits with the kinds of things I'm looking for my team. So
Excellent.
that
Thanks for
sound
having
good?
me. Yeah, sounds great.
Okay, cool. So maybe just start off by just telling me a little bit about how you got into web development.
Sure, how I got into web development. So I'm newer to web development. I'm a career switcher. So my previous experience is largely in the service industry and the healthcare industry. And I really gravitated towards those positions because I love people. I love working with people. I love helping people. And in those experiences, I found there was a lot of friction with the technology that me and my team were having to use. And I kind of felt like if I could dedicate my career to fixing those technologies, I could sort of multiply the impact I was having on people, freeing up their time to help more people rather than struggle with technology. And so when I kind of realized software development was something that I could do and would also make an impact on people, which is a lifelong mission of mine, I went to boot camp and I learned a lot about web development and how to code. But whenever I got out of boot camp, I realized I needed a little bit more experience working on a team to build an app. So I landed a spot on a team of 4 developers at an organization called Collab Lab, where we got experience, working within agile methodologies to build an app together. And so here I am looking for my next big role where I can continue really learning a lot about software development and working on a team to build apps that help people. And I think that's what, when I came across the opening at Zapier, really interested me in it, because I did a little research and I'm starting to notice Yell's mission is very closely related to what I've always felt was right in freeing up people to do people jobs and letting computers do work that computers should do. So hi, that's me. Big
yeah. That's what I was going to say, is that some of the things you were saying do like pretty well seem to map onto what Zapier does as a product. And you've talked a little bit about it, but your next opportunity, like, what do you kind of envision that to be? Like, what would be your ideal?
Yeah, excellent. So absolutely, I want to feel that the thing that I'm working on has an impact on people. I want to be able to make that direct tie to how the work that I'm doing is helping the world be better and
Mhm.
people live fuller lives. Another thing on the team level is because I'm newer, I do want to be in a space that feels very supportive, where
Mhm.
people are interested in collaborating and learning together. So if I feel supported, if I feel safe to ask questions and we're working on something meaningful, that's my ultimate goal.
Mhm. That's great. Yeah. So I put a big emphasis on collaboration and mentorship and things on my team. So we've been careful not to try to hire on somebody who's early in their career until we felt like we were ready and we had our processes in place and we had the right, kind of like senior people in place to where you would have a good experience if you come on the team. So
Excellent.
that's yeah, that sounds great. Tell me maybe about some work you've done in the past that you're especially proud of.
Sure, work I've done that I'm especially proud of. So I mentioned before, I'm really dedicated and passionate about helping people. And so in my engineering experience, one thing that I've been really proud about is the way my team was able to focus on making our app that we were building accessible. Um, I, in boot camp, learned a lot about accessibility when it comes to looking at web pages, right? Color contrast, having alt text on images. But it wasn't until I joined this team of developers building an actual app that had interactions where I was able to see just how deeply accessibility goes and how desperate of a need there is for it in all of the tools that we use. Because when people are actually interacting with the things that you're building, there's so much that we need to do to make it easy for them and make them able to use our tools. And so I have so much to learn in this space, but I'm very proud of the work that we did to learn how to use assistive technologies and to really dig in deep about how to make our app usable for all people. So this is something that I I became really passionate about during this time, and I'm really eager to sort of carry this throughout the rest of my career. And it just feels very closely related to helping people.
Hmm. Yeah. So was that you mentioned Collab Lab?
Yeah,
Is that the project you're referencing? You talked about accessibility.
yeah. So the Collab Lab is the software development team experience that I have.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's an 8-week program where you are on a team with 4 other developers working to build an app together, um, following agile methodologies under the supervision and guidance of 2 to 3 mentors.
Hmm.
Um, and basically, we built a smart shopping list app together. And it was broken down into some user stories with acceptance criteria. And we pair program through those, splitting off into 2 pairs each week to get those tickets across the board and build an app.
Yeah. Okay. And that's where you focused on accessibility.
Yeah, so the focus of the whole build wasn't on accessibility, but it's something that we as a team felt was very necessary to include, and we were eager to
Hmm.
include that. So, yeah, as we were building all of our features on that, being really mindful right up front about how a user would use those,
Hmm.
whether it was somebody who had a disability or a situational disability, um,
Hmm.
we were able to sort of think deeper about the user experience and learn a lot about accessibility along the way.
Okay. Great. Cool. Um, Maybe tell me about a time when you've had conflict on the team, and how did you handle the situation? How did you handle the situation?
Sure. Conflict on the team. We had a really fantastic team experience. I will say there was this fun situation where at the Collab Lab, our project was broken down into user stories with requirements, like I was saying. And what we would do is we used GitHub projects to organize those in a board where we would move tickets from to
Mhm.
do to in progress, ready for review, and done. And
Mhm.
a stressor that me and my teammates were facing is that one of our mentors who had the final review wasn't getting around to reviewing our code until the night before our deadline. And it would kind of send us like spiraling and rushing in to get things done and get those final code changes in before we had to demo the work the next day.
Mhm.
But because we were running retrospectives where we were able to talk about what was working and what wasn't working and sort of make changes, we were able to bring this up to them that this is something that was causing a little bit of pain and friction for us. And what we came to realize was that this mentor wasn't aware of when they needed to be reviewing, when we were ready for them to review. So we all decided together that if we added another column to that board so that it went to do, in progress, ready for peer review, where the team could review it, and then ready for mentor review, they would be able to more easily detect when they were ready for review, and we were able to get our work out the door easier. So the conflict there was just that we were feeling a lot of stress and we were feeling rushed, like down to the very end. And then just by talking it out and being really open and transparent about what would help us work better, we were able to come up with a solution a lot better and just work better as a team.
Yeah, I love that. It's like the real spirit of Agile where, like it's the reason you do retrospectives, right? Like you talk about, oh, here's something that's not going super smoothly. What's the improvement we can make? Exactly. And it sounds like that had a good effect on the process.
Yeah, and I think that we couldn't have had that conversation if we didn't have a lot of trust as a team, which is something that I also value in a team setting. That you were asking what would make my time on the team really great. I think it's having a really trusting relationship. But yeah, after we talked about that, it was really easy to follow up on it. And I don't condone over processing things, processizing, but sometimes processes are necessary. And this is a time that it really was. And we were able to confirm that that's what we needed to fix our downfall.
Yeah. Okay, great. Cool. What do you, so you've talked a lot about teams and sounds like you really love working on teams and collaborating and things. What does sort of ownership and accountability look like on a team for you?
Sure. So I think ownership and accountability are not the same, but go hand in hand. When it comes to ownership, in the projects that I'm working on, I really want to know that I have a say and that my voice matters. So when we're deciding what we want to build and how we want to build it, I want everybody on the team to be open to listening to everybody's input and coming up with an idea together. And I think that builds really strong ownership. Accountability, on the other hand, for me, is the idea that those things that we owned, when they don't go as expected or when they need improvements or get constructive feedback, we're accountable to that and we make the changes because we're all bought into this ownership and this idea that the thing that we're building matters. So I think on a team, I want to have my voice included in the things that we're owning, and then I will feel accountable for it and want to continue improving on that. So it's kind of like this ownership accountability cycle.
Have you ever been on a team where there wasn't good accountability or people didn't feel ownership?
I haven't been on an engineering team where there was not good ownership or accountability, because in the Collab lab, when we worked together, because we were pairing together, we were very close to each other and we were very close to the product that we were building. And like I said before, we had very open conversations. There was a lot of trust, and we all were working together to make those decisions. In my healthcare experiences and service industry experiences, I think there was much more a lack of ownership and accountability because we weren't building things that were for us. And so I think that that's a big difference between those two industries that I face, that when you're actually building things where you get to make decisions and you get to be accountable for changing those things, it feels like you're making much more of a difference than when somebody just hands you something. Here's a job that needs to be done, go do it. There's a lot less ownership and accountability in those situations. So I think that's one of the benefits of working to build things, especially with a team, is that you're in it with somebody and you're getting to own things with people, build things together.
Yeah. Science sounds to me a little bit like the difference between supervision and like leadership or something. Exactly like in those service industry, you're just being told, okay, you're on table 10 and whatever. Whereas it sounds like you really enjoyed having input on the product direction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the superpowers that career switchers have, is that we have a lot of extra context to provide. So when I was working on this team of developers to build a thing, we all came from different backgrounds, and it was really clear to see that we all knew different things, and our input together on how we wanted to build things, what we wanted them to look like, and how we wanted people to navigate through them was all very thoughtful and intentional, and came from a place of humanity, almost us coming together with our shared experiences to build something together. And that was great to see.
Yeah. So we do our best to make sure that we have, kind of a sustainable pace of work and, good work-life balance and all these kinds of things. But inevitably, sometimes we get a little stressed, and it may not even be work that's causing it. The world is pretty stressful at the moment. So I'm just curious, how do you sort of show up when you're under stress? Like, what does that look like for you?
Sure. So when I'm stressed, I think it's hard for people to detect that. I generally keep a straight face, keep moving, and just keep taking on more work. And
Mhm.
this is why it's really important for me to have a really trusting relationship with my manager and with my teammates. Because if I'm not asked and I'm not put in a, a close, trusting situation where I can say that I'm feeling overwhelmed, I won't say it. And I'll just keep getting overwhelmed and just keep doing it and working too much. And so
Mm.
in my next opportunity, I'm really looking for that close, trusting relationship where we can check in and where I can continue improving, kind of protecting myself and understanding how to set limits and how to um, set boundaries, really. So I would hope that the next manager I would have would be in a good coaching space where they can help me
Mhm.
get better at showing up and being transparent about when I'm feeling stressed and overwhelmed.
Mhm. Yeah, it's important these days to bring that approach to being a manager for sure.
I
Um,
love to hear that.
yeah. So we're getting close to our time, so I want to give you a chance to ask me any questions that you might have.
Yes. Okay. So I have a few questions.
Mhm.
I've listed them in priority order. So if you need to cut me off, that's totally fine. I will
Okay.
go on forever. What would you say is your management style?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's so uncommon that people ask me this. So I subscribe to a style of management that a lot of people call servant leadership. So what that means is that I'm not like a heavy-handed boss type. Like
Mhm,
we're all trying to accomplish a goal, and I
mhm,
have a role in that, and you have a role in that. Um, there's formal authority that I have, right? Like I as a sort of represent the company in certain situations, and I'm technically have the power to like fire people and stuff. So I get that there's a dynamic there and everything, but as much as possible, like we're on a team, we're working together. My role might be to make sure that you're connected to the right people who have answers about the thing that we're trying to build, or keep you unblocked, like have like the right tools that you need. And your job is to like do the work, obviously, but also like raise to me when there are issues, like things we're not gonna hit a deadline, or
mhm.
if something's blocking you or something. um, I could go on about this forever too, but so in terms of styles of sort of leadership, I'm what's called an affiliative leader. So big
Okay.
emphasis on collaboration and relationships on the team, making sure people are kind of as much as possible kind of in harmony, and so that people feel good working together, so that um, when things get tough, like we have those kind of bonds to lean on.
Mhm,
It does come with some downsides of there are times that I might try to coach somebody out of a poor behavior instead of being a little more directive and saying I
mhm.
need this to change. So I'm working on that as a manager, trying to get better at that. But that's probably enough for
I love
now.
that. That's great.
Yeah.
Um, I don't quite know how to frame this question, but you were
Mhm.
talking a lot about ownership and accountability
Mhm.
earlier on, and I'm just curious how how you see ownership and accountability. How do you see the ownership and accountability your engineers feel towards the things that you're creating?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So as much as possible, like we try to involve engineers as early in the process as we can, sort of figuring out not only how to build the thing we want to build, but even what we're going to build.
Mm,
So, with our product manager and designer and myself, we're having conversations all the time to make sure the engineers understand our customers, understand the goals that we're trying to
okay.
achieve. So we're working on trying to improve product onboarding at the moment. So we're all I have it right here on my desk. We're all reading this book together called Better Onboarding,
Oh,
where
that's excellent.
yeah, we're trying to learn about like from other people about like what does a good onboarding experience look like, and then try to apply that to what we know about our own customers. Core routines we want them to be in, entry points into the product, mapping those things. So anyway, all that to say, like engineers are involved in all those conversations. It's not a case where product manager and designer just say, "Here, build this thing." Um, so what that does is it gives the engineers a much more of a feeling of ownership over the thing they're building. Because there are a lot of well, you could specify, all day long what you want as a product manager, but there are going to be 1,000 little decisions that need to be made along the way. And the more context the engineers have, the more they can make some of those easy calls on their own, and then recognize when something might have a little bit more of an implication or more risk, and raise that to one of us. So that's a lot of the ownership side. The accountability side is, if things go, I mean, we're all on call for the service we're building. So it's one like very direct, tangible way that, if we get paged in the middle of the night, it's because of stuff we did. So service ownership, in that sense, is it's its own form of accountability. But
Right.
yeah, I could go on about this too, but we're kind of running out of time. So and actually, let's call it there. Scene.
Okay.
Right. Good job, Stacy.
Excellent.
Woo. I would love to hear from everybody. What do you think of that? Like, would you hire Stacy? I would hire Stacy. I did hire Stacy. So
That also, like, there's no part of that was like perfect. So if you're like, oh, she shouldn't have done that, call it out, because that's a real
Yeah.
thing.
That's a big compliment coming from EJ, who's an actor, right? So yeah, what feedback would you have for Stacy or me?
I'm wondering, so one thing I struggle with is like downplaying my own like competence, because I just assume that people understand that I'm competent at what I do. But obviously they don't know me. They don't know like what I know. So I kind of like skip over some of that. How would you like assert your competence and assert that you are a good engineer, you love learning, like you can take on new tasks and roles and you're successful at that in an interview, to make sure that people like kind of get that feeling from you that you are competent, you're autonomous, like you can do the role?
I think one thing that I wish I would have done in that interview, kind of along those same lines, is throw in some more technical stuff. And I feel like because you're very close, y'all actually had these experiences very recently. So you can probably think of examples of stories where you're like, we thought the database should have been structured like this, but instead we needed to have it structured like this. So we put this technical thing in place to fix it. And I think just in your experiences, kind of weaving in some technical stuff is helpful for that, rather than where I just kind of like did a higher level sort of emotionally, here's the things I think, organizationally, here's the things that I think. I'm not getting too deeply in the weeds to the technicalities, but just demonstrating that I've done technical work. I didn't do that very well in this interview. I hope you know that. Okay.
Actually,
Yeah, I mean,
you
I
did in
was
a couple places though, kind of subtly. I scribbled down a note to tech name drop. So you were telling
good.
one story, but you were dropping some stuff in there. It seemed like it was intentional. So
Excellent.
good.
I was hearing a lot of stuff about Agile, like that's kind of impressive for an early career person. Like you're aware of acceptance criteria and some of these terms that I'm comfortable with, but I wouldn't necessarily expect somebody right out of a boot camp to be comfortable with. I think it's really good feedback, Lindsay, about like, maybe like mention like the framework you're using. If you say like React and Firebase and stuff, it kind of gives me a sense of like, oh, okay, like you're not just kind of like flailing at the keyboard or something. Like you kind of have a sense of what these things do. So yeah, maybe weaving a little bit more of that in would have given me a little more confidence. But all the process stuff, team stuff, I was like, oh, of course, she's amazing. What other feedback? Anything?
I thought you had a really good answer for the conflict question, where you talked about the GitHub boards and how you just added another column. That was pretty smooth.
Excellent. Yeah, and it's like I thought about that one, and I also thought about there's times like I've seen a lot at Collab Lab where there'll be a person in a team, and this isn't like a specific team, this is just at large, it'll happen, who like is really technically advanced and will sort of move forward without like bringing their teammates along with them, and getting on like talking in retros about like, let's all be really communicative of the technical work we're doing and learn from each other, can be sort of a conflict story of like, we had to let this person know that we want to learn with them and encourage them to work with us and teach us, and kind of leaning on those kinds of stories can be good interpersonal communication things.
Yeah, I'd have to say I did. It was a good story. I did feel like you might have been avoiding like an interpersonal conflict story.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's a little bit about like, oh, the team was feeling some angst and we gave feedback.
Yeah.
Like that's a good story.
should I have said like like as an interviewer, if I were like,
Uh-huh.
I was frustrated because without have looked like more specific, probably.
Yeah. I guess like the what I was kind of hoping out of the question is like if you had a conflict with a teammate,
Mm,
how would you go about resolving that?
yeah,
As opposed to like, oh, this process wasn't optimal for the
yeah,
team or something.
I love that. So like talking about here's like high level. I don't have time to go into it, but yes. So like if you pick
Yeah.
those stories where you like we're working with somebody who was really challenging at Collab Lab, I'm sure you've had something that wasn't necessarily angsty or bad, but we're just having trouble communicating and talking
Mhm.
about like we were trying to work through it in Slack and we were just getting really frustrated. So we got on the line and talked about it and worked it out
Mhm.
and set new expectations so that we knew how to move forward. Those kinds of stories.
Yeah,
Okay.
like we didn't agree on the approach we should take for this thing, and we kind of butted heads a little bit, but in the end, we decided to go with the other person's thing and to see if it worked as a way to get us ourselves unblocked, or like something like that. Yeah. Yep. For sure, Jen.
All right,
Answering
ready
negative
to pass
questions
it
are always a
over?
bit tricky, and answering even an answer where you felt you didn't do a good job. You like talk about how you would approach the same different situation differently now. Okay. Just wanted to read that into the recording.
Yeah, I love that. I love that talking about, and I didn't do that at all in this, but I do think there's a lot of power in saying, even if it's a good situation where like, I did this situation really good, be like, going forward now, I always try to implement this in the beginning, or I'm very clear up front, or we spend more time in the beginning planning, or just kind of talking about what you do now or what you would do now is really powerful.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool.
And with that, we can hand it over to Lewis and Jen.
Lewis and Jen.
Hello.
Hey. Hey, Jennifer, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. So yeah, my name is Lewis. I'm a software engineer in Sacramento. So nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
So I think what we can do is, if you don't mind, you can share your screen and maybe walk through the project you made. Then we can go through how it works and then go through the code.
Sure. Sounds great. So I have a really wide screen, so I'm gonna have to do some funny stuff to get it to fit on everybody else's screen. So hold on.
Okay, no worries.
Share. Can you all see that? Oh, let me.
Yeah, I see your VS Code.
All right, let me pull it down. Oh, I'll know how to resize it. I think this will be good for now. All right. Does anyone need the font to be bigger or smaller? Or...
No, I think that should be okay.
Good. All right, cool. Well, yes. So hi, I'm Jennifer. It's nice to meet you. I am a software engineer from Portland, Oregon. So for the take-home exercise here, I'll just go over the prompt really quick and show kind of demo how the product, and then I'll go back into the code to kind of see how it works. So the actual prompt was to create a text converter. And so this is an example of kind of what was provided as boilerplate code. And you can see here, there is an input box. You have an option to convert text to lowercase or convert it to uppercase. You would submit the form and then automatically the text will be outputted here in the output box below. So that's the expected behavior that was kind of listed out in the README here. And it was quite minimal in the requirements. And so just about correctness, about following the instructions for the output, how the code is structured, and et cetera, et cetera. So if we go to the final product of what I created, I put a little bit of flavor on top just because after I had finished the initial, initial iteration, I thought I'd give it some flavor and pizzazz. So there's a few emojis in here, but basically here, here's the default example text. If you want your text to be lowercase, you click submit, and it's really, really tiny and gray, and you can barely see it. Otherwise, if you want to convert your text to uppercase, you can also submit here. and it'll just yell it at you in giant red letters. Another thing that I added in is if you don't actually input anything, it gives you an error message here. So you need to actually have an input. And I can explain more why I didn't put in like a required field here instead of just a personal error message. But if you type in, hi everyone, and you want to whisper it in, it'll work back again and the error message goes away. So now now that you see, is there any questions so far about how this works, what it does? But yeah, so that's the final product and we can kind of go into the code itself. So a lot of the boilerplate code originally came in app.js. And in app.js, there's a bunch of state up here that was originally put in to handle the toggle of the radio buttons, the state of the text input, and the state of the text output. So you can see here, this is all the state and then the different handle functions. Most of my logic happened within this handle submit function and a little bit of styling and things like that down in the HTML that was rendered. So I will go into a little bit more detail there. So if we go down, I guess one of the best places to start would be the util file that I created. So this util file I created, I wanted to make it a little bit more organized so that in the future, let's say you want to add more different types of text transforms. I kind of abstracted everything out into a utils config so that right now there's only 2 options, but if eventually you want to have a drop down that has like 50 options, they're all in one place and it's easy for you to see. So you can see I have the transform function to go to lowercase and go to uppercase here. I also included some error handling to make sure that the input text actually was valid. Just as a side note, originally 2 lowercase doesn't actually throw any errors if the string is empty because it's still of type string and it's valid. So it'll still push it through, but I wanted to have my own error message. So that's why I actually throw an error here if it's empty. And so you can see that both of these utility functions. Then for here, I have actually organized the conversion options into different objects that you can view as kind of configs. Part of the reason I did this is because every single option has a lot of different HTML elements that are kind of associated with it. And I kind of wanted like a master list of everything that I could grab and all the information. So it doesn't get a little bit too confusing once, yeah, like I said, if there are more than 2 options. So you can see here, I have the actual value. This is the state value that would be stored, the label that you saw earlier with the emoji, and then the description. The reason I put description out into its own line is because if I had more time, I would have liked to kind of had some hover over kind of effects to like say, show what whisper your thoughts even means or yell your rage even means. And then actually putting the text transform function here. So that you know that for lowercase, it's text transformed to lowercase, and then for uppercase, it's text transformed to uppercase. So if we go back to the app.js function after we've seen kind of how the options and everything config works, if we go back to my HTML that's rendered, you can see that there are 2 inputs that are rendered here. These are the 2 options for 2 lowercase and 2 uppercase. One of the things probably I'd like to improve if there are more inputs. I wanted to put like a sarcastic input, you know, if it's like randomized case on all those like memes. I thought that would have been funny, but probably mapping through all the different options I have in the config probably would have been a better idea, so that it isn't so hefty as we add more. But anyways, back to the inputs. So I have 2 radio button inputs here. And then you can see it's hooked up to the handle radio change. So, and the extra label here. So you can see I kind of, having the conversion options made it a little bit easier for me to kind of organize everything and make sure I'm just putting in the right thing where it needs to go. So for the handle submit function, So this is the output text here, and you can see that the class name actually has a different, it's actually tied to state. And so if we go back up to the handle submit function, every time you click the submit button, it makes sure that the previous error was removed so that you don't have like persistent errors if you had an error previously. Then it'll use a try catch block to try to transform the text. And then if it's successful, it'll set it to set the output style, which is just the different conversion modes is the value. I made 2 classes for the different values so that it can do those different coloring or CSS styles. And then I also put the output to the transformed text from this conversion. So if not, it catches the error, and then it actually sets the error message here, the error message state, to be one of the error messages that I actually have a config for also in utils, so that I don't have to copy and paste the same error message over and over again. And then I also have a generic error message. If for some edge case error that I didn't think about might come through, then there's also a default error message. And you can see down here, the error message actually shows up here tied to this transform error. So because if transform error is null, so if it's falsy, then it won't render this error message. Otherwise, it'll kind of also toggle if the text area is invalid, kind of for accessibility reasons, and also give it a role of alert for accessibility reasons also, to show that this message is an error. But yeah, so that's kind of a quick rundown of my code. Did you have any questions for me?
Nice job with this. Really like the theme too. So
Thanks.
you actually briefly touched on my first question, which is going to be about how the process would be to add a new conversion. So do you think you can just like quickly review that with me one more time?
Yeah, sure. So part of the reason why I put all of these options here, like adding a new conversion, let's say I want to add like the sarcastic case, so it'll be like random case or something. The only thing I'd have to do is basically kind of copy and paste this kind of config here. And I would go into here and just kind of determine what I want the value to be here. And then label would probably be like, I don't know, you're feeling really sarcastic or something like that, and pick my emoji. And then it would add the description. Then the other thing I would do is probably add another util function here to actually transform of that random case. Part of the reason I actually didn't do that was because I actually have this test file here to just do some rudimentary tests on my transforms to make sure if it's a valid input or if it's invalid input that it throws an error or it returns something as expected. I wasn't sure how to go about testing something that's completely random. And so that's one of the reasons why I didn't go into that. But yeah, so that's probably how I would go about adding another option and then instead mapping through the options instead of like copying and pasting the HTML again in apps. And I closed apps, so maybe I'll open it again down here so you can see each and every single input is kind of this. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So if you were to like say we had like 20 different conversions, how would you set up the app.js so that you wouldn't have to copy and paste the form every time, or the radio input?
Yeah. So as an example, I'd probably copy and paste this either maybe into its own file. It kind of depends on how big this whole app is going to be in general and how the team likes to organize things. But I would probably abstract this out into its own component. And then the component you can just map through all the keys of the config options, and then kind of probably destructure the config object itself and just put the value here, the label here, and the description here. The other thing maybe is if there's a lot, you'd have some UI considerations of radio buttons are not that great for like too many options. So let's say you have like 20 different transforms. You might want like a drop down or to reconsider maybe having different groupings for different options. I don't know. It depends on kind of like what the requirements are and what you're looking for.
Okay, cool. And so actually you just touched on this too, is one thing I noticed, since like all the logic right now is in the app.js file. I was wondering if you can like maybe sort of walk through what you might do if you were to break this up into different components, and like how would they communicate with each other?
So I think definitely these individual radio buttons, like this whole thing is one giant form, and the output is another thing. You can do a couple things. You could probably create different components for each part to clean up on the app.js side. The only downside to that is, depending on how much you nest your components, you'll have to drill down kind of your props further into further levels. But if that wasn't an issue, because at this point it would probably just be drilling down props like one level, then I'd probably or one or two levels, maybe the form is one, the radio buttons would be another component, and then probably the output would be another separate component. So then all the state would still live in app.js, but it would probably just get passed down into the children components.
Okay. Instead of doing prop drilling, what were some other options that you might be able to use to pass data from one component to another?
Another thing that I think about, I personally like using the things that React has available to me until it's really necessary to use like a third party like state management system. But using something like context, if you really have a lot of like prop drilling going on, typically it's discouraged for you to use context as a state management system. But I found that for very, very complex apps, but that might not necessarily have a lot of app-wide state that needs management, context for like a particular area. For example, the form context would be very useful here to be able to pass down the children. So essentially, you can just provide, create the context and then provide it down to the children components.
Okay, great. And so let's talk a little bit about the styles then. So I noticed that we currently have one style sheet. I think one thing I found difficult was I didn't know, well, when I first saw it, I didn't know exactly which classes were being used, but how would you, what are some other ways that we could organize the style sheet so that it could be a little more clear where they're being used?
Yeah, I think so. Most of this style sheet, to be honest, I left from the, what do you call it? The boilerplate code.
Oh,
The
that's fine,
only
yeah.
classes I think I added were this error class and also these two results classes here. For me, I tried to take one step and take a look at how the CSS was already laid out from the boilerplate. And what I saw was HTML elements were at the top and then alphabetical order, and then classes were just alphabetical order. So part of the reason why it wasn't entirely obvious which ones I added is because I just kind of inserted them in alphabetical order to try to follow what was already there. CSS wise, for me, probably, I wanted to actually look up how to maybe use maybe some sort of like pseudo class or something to make the result like varying colors and things kind of more concise instead of creating a whole new class on top of it. But other than that, I might also like in the event that I would be abstracting out children components for app.js, I would probably attach a specific CSS style sheet for that actual component file. The only problem with that is that you really have to be intentional with naming, so you don't have any styles colliding after they all get kind of compiled together on build. But that's probably how I'd approach it.
Okay. I had actually one suggestion too, is if you're going to make different styles for like the different conversions, you can use data attributes. So you can make like just a result class, and then you can do like result and then have a nested style with like a data attribute. That way you don't have to make several different class names.
That would
That's
be a
what-
smart thing to do. That's a great suggestion. Thanks.
And also I had a question about accessibility because actually I haven't used the area error message before.
Mhm.
Could you tell me a little bit about those different fields and how they kind of work?
Yeah, so I am not an accessibility expert at all. And I want to preface this by saying I came up with this answer by doing a little bit of Google foo and trying to figure out, just because I wanted to have this error message here, but while I was typing in the code, I was like, how does someone with the screen reader know that this is an error? So that's how I ended up going through maybe a handful of Stack Overflow questions. And what I understand to be the case is ARIA invalid is something that helps like indicate if like an input that you've put in is invalid. So it's expecting like a true or false, like text-based Boolean. And then it also has the pointer for the error message to actually be the ID of the item there. Although I don't know how often accessibility requirements get updated, but I do remember I was reading the example for this from the 2016 accessibility guide. So I don't know if this is actually best practice, but this is kind of I've been in my own work trying to do a little bit more research about accessibility, because oftentimes I'm guilty of this too, that it becomes like a second thought. And so I thought this would be kind of a fun thing to research while I was making this.
Yeah, that's really neat. Actually, I didn't know about the error message being attached to the ID because I thought I was gonna like say something in the screen reader. That's really neat. So I just have one last question. Let's say this is all good to go. We're ready to ship it, get our users using this. So how would you go about deploying this? And also, since you have a test, how would you set it up that it could maybe run a test before you deploy it?
So I would probably, first of all, have to Google a lot of different things. But the way we do it at work is that, well, since this is just a plain React app, there's actually a lot of different hosting solutions that you can do. You can either like build it and export it into like just HTML and JavaScript and like host it anywhere, like throw it in Amazon S3 bucket, throw it in like a Google bucket, something like that. Or if you want it to be able to kind of be deployed from like a GitHub repo, you could use something like Nullify or a lot of those other services, just to make it easier. So every time like you commit or something like that, you could just like push that up, that new version up. For test wise, I actually don't know how to set this up, but this is something I'd be interested in to learn. Is I know we kind of use like BuildKite and things like that to automatically build and run tests when we kind of push code up and linked it to our repo at work. And so I think that is something I would be interested in learning how to set up, because that's really essential in not kind of pushing up code that you accidentally break one of the features and it hits production.
No, that's totally fine. I just thought I would ask. But yeah, you did an awesome job. So thank you for meeting, and nice work with the application.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for your time.
Cool. Good job, y'all. Way to go, Jen. Oh
Okay.
yeah, here's some tests that I wrote. Just as an aside, yeah. What do people think of that? What feedback do you have? Did you hire
I'm
Jen?
scared and intimidated. That was so good. And I'm like, ah.
Yeah, I thought that was amazing. I want to redo my take-home test now.
The sarcastic mode.
Yeah, you did such a great job. That was so helpful. I had like a ton of notes, so thank you.
I do have a question. I guess this is for all of you. So jazzing it up. can you go too far? Is that a great thing to do? If you don't jazz it up, is that measured as well of like, wow, they met the brief and didn't go 1 millimeter past?
It's a great question. Jazzing it up at the expense of doing core things that are being asked for, not probably a good idea, right? Like you want to, if there are requirements, hard requirements, do those first. If there is something to be said for kind of sticking to the requirements too, like that's, depending, might depend a little bit on the hiring manager or the team. Like, some might want to see the creativity and like really value that, and others might be like, oh, you like, that's, I could envision you like kind of blowing out scope when we're trying to like meet a deadline or something, right? So there's probably a fine line to be walked there. And I think like, adding an emoji to the string is like great, adds some personality. Holding back from actually implementing sarcastic mode is probably the right call. Like if you had it in your back pocket, you could talk about how you would extend the app. But if you've taken the time to do that, that might worry some hiring managers, not all of them, but maybe some people.
I think it's good too to minimize the amount of third-party libraries, or just not use third-party libraries that aren't already in the application, because it could make the more confusing for the interviewer if they're not sure what the libraries are for.
How about just how Jen sort of articulated, like it kind of answered the questions? Like what was there anything you noticed about that? Any feedback you'd have for her, or things that she maybe that you really appreciated that she did well?
I like seeing questions that she wasn't like super familiar with doing before, like the running the test before, because I think she handled those questions really well, and that's something that is gonna happen. So it's really nice to see her like kind of take on those questions, and like, even if she may not have run automated tests like on build, I haven't, but like being able to see how to answer that question a different way and seeing her interest, like how to show her interest in that, and she's still interested in learning about it. It's really good.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, Jen, you did a really good job of that. Of like, I don't really know that thing that well, but here's what I do know about it. Like with the area, the attributes too, right? Like, well, I did some Googling, like, so I'll tell you what I know, but I'm not an expert. It's great to be just clear and upfront about it. It shows confidence, I think, that you can present it that way. Google food.
I had another one. Because Lewis, you said something about not recognizing the class names for all of that. And then Jen, great description of all of it. About commenting. When you're doing a task, do you comment it just like you would for real work? Or would you write little notes to the person that's going to read it? Because like when I do my own stuff, I write notes to myself, but no one's going to see those. So where's the line between too much and too little?
Yeah. I've been talking about anybody else, like Lewis or Stacy or anybody else want to answer that? EJ?
Oh yeah, you mean like comment in the code, right? Yeah, actually, I think
like
I
if
would
she had
definitely
put something in the CSS that said, I put these here for this reason or something, just so that you would know why they were there because it's new.
Yeah, I would definitely encourage it. You don't have to like go overboard, but just like little notes here and there to help guide the interviewer who's just seeing the project for the first time would be helpful.
EJ?
Yeah, I agree with what Louis said. One thing to keep in mind is that you could be helping your interviewer to easily parse your work. So even though they might be experienced and knowledgeable, it helps to explain just in case something might be tricky or unusual, in case you know something they don't, which can happen all the time. It happens to all of us. If you explain your code, that way they can feel confident reviewing your work, and they feel like you take care of your teammates, which is a really good sign.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. It's not that different from being on a team of developers and meeting, commenting for the purpose of making sure your team understands. Just happens to be that they're an interviewer or whatever, but you could leave the same types of comments. I did this for this reason to help them orient, but also that's a clue of what you would do when you're in the job. What else?
Same lines. Some things I've done for actual take homes is kind of give like a mini debrief in the README. So some comments can be a very like dividing line on different types of teams. My team really likes to give context comments. Some teams don't like any comments. So I think you can kind of add a few comments here and there in the code that are like more context versus telling what you did. And then if you want to explain your decisions ahead of time, then I like to like list out the pros and cons of why I did something this way or something like that in the README. Or like sometimes I like to put a checklist of the steps that I need to take to actually get the requirements in. So for example, if it's a time to take home, I run out of time, then they can kind of follow along and see kind of what I did. And then I'll usually like leave 15 minutes at the end of like a time take home to make sure I do that, so that I communicate that I understand that I might not have met all the requirements, but this was my plan to actually finish it.
I love that. Use your words, not your code words, but your real words in comments and in readmes to give them more context, because this is where you get to shine. This is where you get to show them who you are and how you work, and that communication is really important to you. Don't fall for the, we need to make this as simple and clean and tight as possible because humans need to read it. That's a engineering skill at large, not just an interview one. Those teeny tiny methods and functions are not always the best. Documenting.
Yeah, I mean, so comments can be divisive, I guess, but if you feel strongly that you wouldn't want to work on a team that took the approach of like no comments ever, like if that's not your jam, like leave some comments, and if you get pushback, then that's make enough team for you.
Cool. Other thoughts? The technical interview, I feel for most people, is the scarier of the two, the more intimidating of the two. So use your mock interviews here to get that initial practice out of the way. If you want to have more than one, if you want to do it again, just let us know. Somebody will be happy to run a mock interview with you, because they can be really intimidating and they can go so many ways. We have a really good session coming up this weekend that Chris Dopich will be running on how to rock the technical interview, where he gives a lot of really great tips on how to prepare for those and what kinds of things to sort of say in those interviews, and also kind of a high level of different ways those interviews can go. As you saw, like in our documentation in that Career Lab GitHub repo, just on our here's technical questions you might be asked, there were like, I don't even know how many, 50 more. And it just goes to show that there are just endless technical questions you could get. Job fit questions, you're going to get very similar ones, basically, no matter what company you're at. So like having 6, 7, 8 stories to kind of pull from, you can kind of mold those into whatever, shape they need to go into. But technical interviews there can be some wild cards. So
Yeah, they take all shapes and sizes. Yeah.
really do.
The good news is that all of you have been doing demos for the last 8 weeks, right? So,
Yep.
You are used to talking about your code and explaining your code to other people. And if you go into it, maybe it's like that, that trick, if you're on stage, you're supposed to picture the audience, whatever. But like in this case, just like imagine you're just doing a demo. It's it's Sunday, you're in your Collab Lab team, you're doing a demo of your work. If you kind of try to keep keep the emotions in check a little bit that way, maybe that's helpful. Just lean on the fact that you've been talking about your code for 2 months now. So
You've been doing it. The last thing I want to touch on is we talked about how Jen was like, I'm not an expert in that. I don't really know. Here's what I would do maybe. My advice to anybody, including me, is learn how to humbly say you don't know. Like have a couple phrases in your pocket that mean, I don't know. And maybe what you would do if you didn't know, because you're not going to know something. They're going to get asked a question that you don't know. And if you have a really mature, humble way to say that you don't know, it can reflect really well on you. So have a couple phrases, practice.
So really good question, Lindsay, in the chat about, is there a good way to ask a recruiter or some contact about the interview beforehand? So there's no harm in asking the recruiter, like, what will be covered in the interview? Like, can you tell me what the format of the interview is? What are we going to cover? They can always say, well, we don't want to tell you in advance, but they may just tell you. And in which case you have a big advantage because most people probably wouldn't ask that question. So that's a really good thing that I feel like we should probably emphasize more when through
Yeah.
Career Lab is, the recruiter is there. The recruiter's job is to fill seats, and they're trying to find good people to put in these seats. They want you to get the job. So they will, whatever they might have constraints on them with, how the company approaches it. But for the most part, they're going to try to help you be successful in the interviews. So partner with them, ask them the questions. Like, worst that's going to happen is they'll say no. They can't, no, I can't tell you.
Then you know. Cool. All right, I'll upload this video. You'll have your mock interviews next week. The next things that we have coming up are the How to Rock the Technical interview session this weekend, and then really just getting ready for your interviews. Spend some time gathering your stories, doing your take-home assignment and walking through how you would talk about that like Jen did. And let us know if you have questions. I'll keep posting notes in the chat so we all stay on the same page. Good. All right. Well,
Thanks,
I'll
everybody.
see
Good
y'all
job.
later this weekend. Bye, friends.
See ya.